life doesn't happen to you. You completely have the ability to take ownership of yourself and of what's being created, and that there's just such beauty and vibrancy when you do take that ownership. It's so opposite, a 180, if you will, from what you think it will be when you actually do take ownership. And it creates this just, openness that allows for perseverance to happen versus motivation. Because motivation is fleeting and it can be, something we're constantly chasing after. But when you have ownership, you can persevere through anything, and it makes it that much more sweeter when you get to the other side, or that end result that you can just bask in.
Welcome my guest, Alejandra Crisafulli. She is award-winning master coach and global speaker with over 20 years of experience in coaching, training, and development. Alejandra is considered one of the pioneers in the coaching industry. She has worked with over 2,000 coaching clients, trained over 300 coaches, guided entrepreneurs to scale multiple six-figure and seven-figure businesses, and has built a multi-million-dollar coffee business with her husband, Eric, spanning Southern California. Known as the Baller Coach, her mission is to help humanity return to the truth and simply of mastering life. Alejandra's holistic, client-centered approach to training and coaching sees people as a whole, complex beings as they are. Instead of isolating mindsets or motivations, she cultivates the complete baller. Her 180 method is rooted in decades of professional experience as well as formal training. The result is giving her clients the modern-day magic that gets results without the BS. All right, welcome back to another episode on Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast. I'm so honored to bring on this beautiful lady that I have been getting to know over the last year, and just learning more about her has been such a special experience, honestly, because I've just developed such a high regard for you and just learning about you. And I have much more to learn about you, and I'm just enjoying it all. But I'm just so happy to bring you on the show because I want to share your wisdom with everybody else, as well as learn more myself about everything you teach women, men to actually heal instead of just keep dealing with the problems that come up in life, relationships, or family matters. So just welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Honored, my friend.
Oh, so sweet. So Alejandra, I know you're known as the Baller Coach, which I'm kind of curious where that name came about. But before we talk about what we're going to go in today, I want to hear your story. What even got you into wanting to teach people how to actually heal their problems? What got you into life coaching? Because I know you started about 20 years ago, which that wasn't even such a career at that time. So what inspired you, or what was the catalyst into leading you there?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, it'll be actually 21 years in November, which is just crazy to me. And it wasn't a thing. Nobody really knew what life coaching was back then. But I think most people who do this type of work, it's something that we're called into. God gives us these natural gifts, and then we're called into these areas in which we're meant to help people. And I personally was going through some things at that time, had a lot of insecurities from my own childhood, felt very unworthy, unlovable, not enough, not important, all the things. And it was really impacting my life. And I found myself pregnant. And 2 weeks after I found out I was pregnant, the father of my daughter decided he wanted nothing to do with us. And that was kind of going on simultaneously with, I was business consulting at the time. And I was starting to recognize that, yes, we need systems and structures and these strategies in place to be successful in business. But really, what it was coming down to and what I was seeing is that it's not so much that was causing someone to be unsuccessful in their business, it was themselves getting in the way. And so I was like recognizing, like, okay, my life is like not great right now. I'm seeing this happen with like my clients and them getting in their own way. It's got to be something like about us and like who we are as human beings and why we do what we do and how we interact and communicate with ourselves and others. And so I kind of just went down this path of like seeking, answers. And I went to therapy, and it was, productive in some degrees. But I found that I was just like talking about things and
Yeah.
nothing was really getting resolved. And then I was introduced to life coach. At the time, I thought it was just happenstance, but now I know it was a full on like God moment. Where I went to a workshop that a client had told me about, a business client, and there was this class called Life Works. And it was super fascinating. Never had heard anything like this. And it was a business course, this workshop. So I was sitting in this class, and this lady starts talking about you are your business. And if you're not working, your business isn't going to work. And, 20 some years ago was like, whoa, that was the first time I've ever heard something like that.
Yeah.
And so I went and talked to her, and she is the one who introduced me to life coaching. And from there, I, took it on myself and completely changed my life, met my husband, started coaching myself. Yeah. So
So, so through the process of learning more about it, you were able to heal yourself. Is that pretty much what
yeah,
happened?
yeah, healing myself. And there was this, they actually, the people who had put on that workshop were actually looking for a life coach at that time. And when I was talking to that speaker, she was like, we're hiring a life coach, would you be interested? And I was like, wait, what? Like, my life is a mess. What is life? I have no idea what you're talking about. But part of my training would be to go through this life coaching program that they had developed. And so it sounded really amazing and felt like it was exactly what I was looking for. So I went through their program and became a life coach that way.
It's amazing. Okay, so fast forward in the many years you've been coaching, you're a master coach again, over 20 years, almost 21 years of coaching. So you developed a framework called the 180 method. And I know that's the core of your business. Can you
Yeah,
explain what the 180 method is and why this is different from other approaches you see in life coaching? Because I know for myself, I've obviously I'm in this industry. That's what I do. And
right.
I've worked with a life coach 3 times, actually the same one, 3 separate occasions, because obviously I
Yeah,
still needed some work. I was still going through some things.
yeah,
Uh, and I know this is actually kind of what you talk about is like that the repeat, like we'll do the healing work and then something else will happen and we'll return right back to it. And I know I'm not alone in this experience. This commonly happens because we do have patterns that we have developed in our younger years that will be triggered again. And then it kind of repeats its cycle. So if you could talk about the 180 method and just how it's so different from what you see is out there.
yeah. So fundamentally, it does. It comes back to this, like, as human beings, we have this one big problem. I mean, there's many, but there's one big one. And what that is that we tend to approach things in the same way in hopes that they're going to be different or will change in some manner. But we keep approaching it in the same way, which is essentially is an insanity, right? Doing that same thing again and again, expecting a different result. But that's a 360. And so we think we're approaching things differently, but because we still are carrying a lot of the things that have impacted us, and mainly our relationship with ourself, and our relationship with God. Like I mentioned that a lot, and there's a reason for that. But it comes back to that relationship where we end up approaching things in the same way and just do all this work to end up in another 360 cycle. So the 180 method is a solution driven process. And what's so incredible about it and why it works so effectively is because in traditional self help models, there's this kind of like forcing yourself into change rather than taking into consideration how we are actually designed as human beings. And so the 180 method takes into account how we're designed as human beings, which allows for this directional shift that you're going in a new direction from what you have always gone through before. And so when I talk about it takes into account like how we're designed as human beings, what happens is the work that you're doing for healing rather than dealing with things is that it's natural. So it becomes this natural occurrence. The changes become natural versus, oh, I have to force myself to stop this behavior because it doesn't work. Or I have to remind myself to say an affirmation 20 times a day in order to offset what I really think about myself. There's all these kind of like self help tools that can be very valuable. Don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying them, but they can pull you into a 360 and just have it be more of like dealing type things
Mm.
versus naturally allowing yourself to heal. And that's what's so amazing about the 180 and taking into account how we're built and designed as human beings.
Well, I know from other friends, our close friends that work with you, how they have spoken, how it's transformed their lives. And that's why I'm just so interested for others to learn more about this and what you teach. And so,
Yeah.
can we kind of walk through some of this? So, the relationship to self, I think, is key. That's
Yeah,
really the key to address is like, what do we
sure.
actually speak about ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, our limitations, like what is driving our beingness, if you want to say. And I think so many people, uh, again, if anybody is in the personal development space and cares to take responsibility for themselves, they start to look at these things like, what's the stories I tell myself, these limiting beliefs, and kind of dissect it. And I know I've been through this process and it was very powerful for myself to understand that. But one of the key factors that really transformed myself, at least in learning about how to heal certain things, is taking personal responsibility. And I know you speak a lot about this, how all healing kind of comes down to ownership. So if you could
Mhm.
talk about why taking ownership or personal responsibility, however you want to phrase it, is so key in this process of healing.
Mm. So I can say it in like one statement and then we can dissect a little bit more. But essentially, why ownership is so powerful is because what you don't own owns you. And so, again, like through traditional self help models, we're in this place of like trying to get rid of or overcompensate or overcome in some way these things that, we believe about ourselves, like those limiting beliefs you're talking about, or some core like ego identity type things. And we're trying to overcome them. But that's where it becomes very hard and hard work versus this natural that I'm talking about. Through this healing process that happens in the 180 method, you naturally get to this place of ownership. So, for example, I still have like these relationships with or relationship with myself that has this kind of like not enough or not important or unlovable, those things I was talking about earlier. But now, through the healing that has led to ownership, I own those things to where they're neutralized.
Hmm.
There's this neutralization that happens when you're healing through this method. And it's like, before, something could have like triggered me. Someone says something, someone did something, maybe I did something or said something that normally in the past would have been like, boom, I'm right back there. See, I'm not enough, or I'm a piece of shit, or I'm stupid, or why did I do, and in that place. Whereas now it's like, oh, okay, well, that happened. Cool. Moving on. It's like there's not the effect of it. And I didn't have to affirm my way out of it, or oh God, I have to change this behavior. I have to change this thought. It was through that ownership, it becomes neutralized. And it's like, all right, cool, moving on.
Can you explain a little bit more into depth what ownership looks like?
Yeah. So here's the best way I can describe it because it's a little challenging to explain what it truly looks like. So I have this cigarette wound, which you can't see probably on camera, but I had a boyfriend in high school who put out his cigarette on my arm.
Lame.
Okay.
Jeez.
So, see, this is where I was at back then.
Yeah.
So when it first happened, it was this big, like, open, gaping wound, right? So if I like hit it or smacked it or poked it, it hurt really bad. If someone else hit it, smacked it, or poked it, there was also a lot of pain. But through healing, layer by layer by layer, it eventually became a scar. So it's still there, like I can still see it. It's not gone. But now, if I hit it, smack it, poke it, there's no pain. If someone else hits it, smacks it, pokes it, there's no pain.
Yeah.
That's what ownership is like. It's like the scar that, yes, is there. You still remember it, but the pain that was once there, that was either caused by you or caused by someone else or something else, no longer causes you pain.
Beautifully said. I love how you that lay that out. And I think it's really challenging. I mean, I think that I think taking ownership can be thought of as very much like, why should I own this? It's not my fault that this happened, blah, blah, blah. We could get into that cycle. But I think when you look, I think it's very empowering to look at yourself as like, okay, if I played a part in this, then I could play a part in changing this. Meaning,
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely empowering. I talk about personal responsibility a lot because it was the thing that radically changed my situation. And I grasped this idea of like, okay, that is actually, if I'm, because the only thing I can control is myself. So if I take responsibility or ownership for something, then now I'm in control of changing the direction because I can't control anything else that's happening
Yeah.
outside of me. So
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing. And I know it takes time to get there, but I think it's a great thing to like turn the mirror on yourself. Like, okay, where did I, like, what's my part in this? Which really we play a part in every bit of our life. So moving on to, so going a little deeper into your 180 method, I know there's 4 parts of it. Can we kind of
Yeah.
dissect the parts to understand how this plays a part in the healing and how you really help people begin
Sure.
the
Yeah.
process of healing?
Yeah. I think in order to dissect those pillars, I need to share with you kind of like what I was talking about before of like taking into account how we're designed as human beings. So I'd love
Please.
to share that piece with you first and then connect it to the pillars. So we're essentially 2 parts while we're here in this physical world. We're human and we're being, which is why we're called human beings, because we're both while we're here. And so the human part of us is comprised of 2 components. There's the body, and there's also the soul, which most people think that the soul would belong to the being part, but it doesn't. And I'll explain why in a second. But the only part of us or component that belongs to the being is our spirit. So we have, here, let me draw it out. It might be easier to look at it this way. So we have the spirit, we have the soul, and then we have the body, right? So we have like these 3 layers to us. And so the spirit belongs to the being part of us. And then the soul and the body belong to the human part of us.
Hmm.
So you kind of look at it this
Yeah.
way. Okay, so The reason why I say the soul is a part of our human self is because that soul piece of us is like everything that you think of when you think of like, who am I? It's all the stuff that makes up the who am I. So this includes our mind, our will, our emotions, our personality, our beliefs, our behaviors, our ambitions. Like all those things actually make up our soul. And so oftentimes people separate the mind and like talk about mindset, which this is another aspect that's different than traditional self-help. In the 180, we don't focus just on mindset. We focus on soul set because it's the whole of us, not just the mind.
Yeah.
And that soul is very human based because of all those things that are human based. Again, behaviors, emotions, beliefs, all of that, the mind. So when we talk about healing, all the things that we typically need healed fall under the soul level. Beliefs need healing. Behaviors need healing. Things, thoughts, views about ourselves need healing. So all of that needs healing is on that soul level. And it starts at the core though, our spirit. That's where the healing like starts, and then it like infiltrates into these other areas. So that's kind of like the foundation of it. The three pillars, there's the first pillar, which I call the golden key. And this relates to how circumstances are actually created. And so I often ask, clients or potential clients, do you know that you create your circumstances? And I typically get the response of like, yeah. But then when I ask how they create, I get either I don't know responses or things like, well, you kind of mentioned this too, of like, well, I don't necessarily have control of what happens, but I have control of how I respond to what happens, or like I have control of myself. And where, yes, that is true, it's only part of the truth. And so there's this whole other layer that we're not taught. And it, again, like think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you're like really want to respond differently and you just have zero control of that response?
Of course.
It's just
Mhm.
like,
Yep.
it's just like, okay, I really want to act differently, but you know what? Nope. This is
Yep.
how it's coming out.
Yep.
Um, so there's a reason for that. And that's that whole other layer that we talk about and uncover in this golden key. So people get to learn how they actually create their circumstances and relationships in their life. And then the second pillar is the healing formula. So there is this formula, and this is actually where the 180 started, is with this healing formula and learning how to get from where one is at and healing all those things on the soul level to that place of ownership. And then the third pillar is called the 360 human pain cycle. So
Mm.
this is where you learn like what the cycles are, where they come from, why you have them, and then how to heal through them naturally so that the cycle just neutralizes and falls away. And then the fourth cycle is called the 180 mastering life cycle. And the language is important, mastering the life cycle. And that ing part is because we don't master or mastered. It's like the ing makes it active and functioning and continuing, because
Right.
healing is layered. It's not one and done. Like people often say, like, I thought I was done with this. And,
Right. Yep.
like, yeah, at that level, but now you've up leveled.
That's why
So
like life is a continuum, and like we're always going to be in the classroom learning and growing, because that's really the path of life is like we are, yeah, we're always on this journey. It's like ever evolving and ever changing.
yeah, exactly. And we have to actively participate in that. So that mastering life cycle really is like how you again naturally live into that, so that you don't have to keep living in a painful place, perpetuating circumstances that just really don't work for you.
And so, talking on the first thing, the golden key, how you're saying, like, are you aware that you're the creator of your circumstance? How do you help people really shift into like taking the leadership of their life and creating their circumstances? What would
Mm,
be, if you could give us kind of an example of how to even begin to move into that?
yeah. I think it's safe to say, I'm going to generalize for a moment here, but I think this is a safe generalization that none of us like to be victims.
Yes.
No one likes to play the victim or be the victim, right? And so it's just basically pointing out that if you aren't the creator of your circumstances, then who or what is?
Mm,
And if you're not, there's that who or what is, and whoever you think is or whatever you think is, then you are the victim to that person or thing. And because none of us want to be in that place, it's usually this automatic, like, okay, cool, I'm ready. Like, let's, how? I want to see how I'm creating it.
mm. I love that. Actually, bringing that up, I know you talk about there's the three roles we all
Yeah.
play and how that influences how we show up in our lives and relationships. So, can you kind of walk through those three roles and how,
Yeah.
why this is powerful to know of how we show up?
Oh my gosh, I love, yeah, these three roles are juicy. So there are these three roles: the victim, the villain, the hero, and they all play together. And when we're in relationships, we're typically, especially when we're coming from our human self versus our being self, we're typically playing one, if not all of those roles based upon what someone else is playing
Mm,
in their life. So in relationship, we can have so much conflict and drama, mainly because, well, I should, like, again, this comes back to another generalization. Does anyone like to be wrong?
right. I mean, yeah.
No. And so when you're in relationships and you're like having a conversation, oftentimes it shows up as like, I'm saying this, and then it's like, no, I'm saying this, and can't you understand me? And then the other person's like, no, understand me.
Yeah.
No, understand me. So it creates this conflict and drama in the relationship. And what happens is we're casting each other in these roles of villainizing the other person, which makes them a victim. And then this hero
Mm,
comes in to kind of save the day. And so these triangles are just played all over the place when we're coming from our human self. And they're really, the basis is conflict and drama. And they're taken on as a way to try and protect ourselves. Because again, I don't want to be the victim and I don't want to be wrong. So I'm going to
right.
be the villain to prove I'm right and you're wrong.
Right. And so, speaking of that, I know you, and I heard about this at Limitless, the beginning of the year with Brooke Hemingway, her amazing, amazing event, which she has every
Yes.
January. But you were talking about the communication solution. And I was really intrigued by this because communication, I am very aware that this is the foundation of any relationship. And
Yeah.
it's so often, um, a struggle if you want to say it's challenging because again
Yeah.
like the roles we play and how we're trying to kind of assert ourselves in communication and so it could it could get all crazy, right? So
Oh,
can you
yeah.
kind of walk through the communication solution and what would be some of the things you would share on how to better our communication, especially when we're in conflict, meaning like there is some uneasiness with, let's say, a partnership in a relationship, intimate relationship. How can one speak their truth, but not, cause this pullback by the person receiving it because it's, for them, it's not their truth or what they
Right.
believe to be true. If that,
Yeah.
it's kind of a lot of questions in one, but
No, it's great. And yeah, so I think, and tell me if I miss any piece of it, but a couple of things. One is that understanding the basis of communication is that we're receiving whatever the sender is giving us through our own filter, our own perception, and that then connects back to our past and all the things that need healing to get to a place of ownership, so you can hear things differently and not hear them like like you've done something bad or wrong or you failed. It's very challenging to change communication when you still have a lot of pain from the past that you keep hearing the communication through the same filter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's first and foremost of that communication solution, and connects also back to the 180. There's 5 steps to the solution, and the first step is really one of the most important, which is more so asking open-ended questions rather than jumping into an assumption.
Mm.
So someone can say something like, "Why did you say that?" And immediately we can get defensive and be like, "Well, what did I say?" And just get all riled up. And instead of like taking a step back of hearing someone else's question, like, "Why did you say that?" and taking a moment to pause and actually filter through the question rather than get all triggered and hijacked by it and like, "Well, what do you think I said?" Or "I didn't say anything bad," or "I didn't say anything wrong." To just pause and then ask a question back. Like, "I'd love to respond to your question, but I want to make sure that I'm responding from a genuine place. So what's having you ask me that?" Like something of that nature. But just to simplify, I think if we ask questions more than sharing what our interpretation is or what our views are, and just come to asking more questions, a whole lot of communication would be better. Because then you're asking questions for clarity's sake rather than
Mm.
jumping into assumptions all the time. So that solution starts with the right type of questions, because there's also the right type of questions. And I don't want to complicate it. Just ask questions and see how it goes instead.
Be more curious to
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
uncover the meaning behind it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The second part is really allowing the other person to respond. Like if you've asked something for clarity's sake, then tune in and listen. Part of the biggest breakdown, and I touched on this a moment ago, that we tend to have is that we're all trying to be understood,
Mm. Yeah.
but we can't. So let's hopefully let's squash this right now and just tell you that like you can't be understood, and the more you try to be understood, the less understood you will be. What can happen and what we're actually looking for is being heard. We all want to be heard, valued, and respected. But we go to
Amen.
this place, right?
Yes.
Right? But we go to this place of understand me so that you agree with me. Because once you agree with me, then I'm safe.
Mm.
Then it's all good. Then we're okay. But again, that just perpetuates more of the problem. Whereas if you just hear me, that doesn't mean you agree. So for the other person that might be hearing someone else's truth, you don't have to agree with their truth. You just hear their truth. And it makes us feel heard, valued, and respected. To be heard of that truth doesn't mean we agree.
Yeah.
So, does that make sense? Am I explaining that?
Absolutely. And I
Okay,
think
cool.
just explaining that all of us want to be understood or, like agreed with, if you want to say, but I think but actually what's underlying that is just, we want to be heard,
Yeah,
respected.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole understood thing, it's almost like if I told you, like if I wore glasses, like prescription glasses that were very specific to me, and I was like, "Here, Erica, put these on so you can see what I see."
Yeah.
And then you'll understand me. And then you'd
Yeah.
put them on and be like, "I can't see." That's what we're
Exactly.
trying to do when we're trying to be understood. And that's why I'm saying, like, they'll never understand. Just, it's about being heard.
Yeah.
So then the third part of the solution is just acknowledging and affirming the other person, that because that lets them know that you've heard them. And affirming could be really simple, like just even saying something like, okay, oh, uh-huh, got it. I see why you say that. It's something affirmative that lets the other person know that you've heard them. And that actually is the most skipped over step because, again, we usually go into communication with, let me get my point across so that I'm understood. And the other person's doing the same thing. So we're just victim, villain, victim, villain, victim,
Yeah.
villain, back and forth. But the moment you like affirm, I see why you say that. Oh, I get that. Even like a, got it, you know, helps like, oh, okay, they heard me. And then
You,
you go and share.
you know what I love what my partner says, Noah? He says, I hear you, I see you, I feel you. And
Oh, yeah.
honestly, for myself, because he says that a lot, it does make me feel safe and it feels,
Hmm.
again, received.
Yep.
And yeah, so I think that's a great thing to say, at least in my
Yeah.
opinion, it works.
I mean, that's beautiful. And that's that an example of like taking into account how we're built as human beings. Like that's a natural way to feel understood without trying to be understood because you're just focusing on like I'm being heard. Yeah.
Beautiful. And then the next
So
step,
yeah. And then from there you just share, and this is where you speak your truth. So I think one of the last parts of your question was like, how do you speak your truth without causing the other person to go
to be,
into like,
to be
yeah,
received opposed to like rejected,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
So there's three things to speaking your truth. So that doesn't happen. One is that you speak it in the I form because it's yours, right? I, me, my, mine. That's the easy part. The second thing, it's a little harder, which is taking ownership rather than placing blame. So it's like owning whatever it is that you're saying as yours. This is like an example might be, maybe I feel unworthy and typically I would blame you for that. Like, we always make me feel so unworthy when you don't introduce me to your colleagues, something like that. Instead, it would be like, I've realized that I have this unworthiness that I'm healing and that I'm working on. And it comes out when you don't introduce me to your colleagues.
Way better
So
approach.
it's more, yeah, it's more easily received as like, okay, there's not blame on me. They're taking ownership of that. And then the last part, which is the hardest about speaking your truth, is having no expectations. Like no expectations how the other person will respond, how they'll receive it, what the outcome will be. And we just have expectations for all sorts of things. I've had clients talk about like they don't want to share something because they don't want to hurt somebody else's feelings. And yeah, that's valid, but that's an expectation. And if you can take ownership of the truth and how you're sharing it, then most likely they won't have hurt feelings.
Yeah.
But yeah, those expectations are sneaky and will keep us just, let me hold it in and suppress it instead of expressing it.
There's a process to it. But I think
Yeah.
once you start to, and I hope everybody wrote that down because I think just having that and maybe like put a post it on your wall, just reminding yourself so you could start practicing that. I remember I learned somebody else I interviewed. I took one of their workshops and I'm trying to remember the process, but it was about communication and it was
Hmm.
about one of the ways to communicate, they would say, is the story I am telling myself is blah, blah, blah. It's basically like, this is what I'm hearing. Is what you're saying? Because I
Mm.
think so many of us hear so many different things than's actually being said to us because we
Yeah.
have our own stories and we have our own uh, triggers, if you want to say, that informs us
Yeah.
to hear something else. And so I thought that was a beautiful way to express it to somebody like, hey, I'm hearing this. Is this what you mean? That's a great tool. Again, like it's
Oh,
really hard
totally.
when you're in the moment to remember these
Yeah.
things, but that's why I think putting a post-it, writing it down, we actually have ever since we learned this, I will be honest, it's funny because I literally looked at it this morning
Ah,
on our fridge, and I took it from our last fridge since we moved, was the teachings of the steps of communication. Like in this house, we don't blame, shame, blah, blah, blah. And then this is the steps to communicate effectively.
yeah,
I literally wrote this
nice,
down, put on a post it, and I put it on the fridge for everybody
nice.
in the house. And funny
Yeah.
enough, I put it on this fridge, and I haven't looked at it in a long time, but I looked at it this morning before this conversation. It's just funny. But I think that's helpful because I think it's so easy when you're heated, when there's conflict. Oh gosh, I mean, which we're
Yeah.
going to talk about this offline, but I had a thing happen this week, and it was actually around communication,
Yeah.
1000%. And
Yeah.
anyways, that's a different subject. But but yeah, so I
Yeah.
think it's so helpful, everything you just walked us through. But I think it's, it takes, again, this is a healing process. So we are
Mhm.
learning, continuing to, strengthen these skills, if you want to say, because communication can be a skill. And I think it's only
Yeah.
learned through repetition. So
Mhm.
if you could remind
Mhm.
yourself, so that's so helpful. Well, another
Oh,
question I have in regards
yeah.
to healing is, what do you feel is really getting in people's way the most, and what needs to be, and we might have already touched on it, but like, what do you feel is really the common thing out of the thousands of people you've coached with now, the common thing that's getting in people's way? And what is your truth behind that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about most of them. The thing that like I hear the most is around being blocked and like so much of like who I end up working with are people who have done a lot of like other traditional type models and had some success with it, but then found themselves back in a 360 or that stuck blocked kind of place. And that stuck blocked place really does come back to what I feel is not really having our relationship with ourselves be founded in that being part of us, but more so in the human part. And I can expand a little bit upon that. Like when we're born, we're totally connected to that being part because we're brand new here.
Yeah.
The mind has not yet developed. We haven't learned behaviors yet. We haven't learned beliefs yet. We don't have any ambitions other than to like cry, poop, sleep, eat kind of thing. Like that's it. And so we're very connected to that being. And when you look at children, like you can see it. It's just like they're wearing their beingness. And so their relationship with themselves is founded in that being part.
Mm-hmm.
But as we start going through life and these things start happening and the mind develops and we learn behaviors and we learn certain beliefs and views and thoughts about ourselves and the ego gets born, which you've probably heard it like this before, but it's like edging God out, which is edging that being part of ourself out. And so then we end up in our relationship with ourself that is very human based.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lonely place to be because then we're self reliant, self dependent, self sufficient, self empowered, which I get is a big thing right now about being self, but that's just self versus you with a greater power that is beyond just you. And that's a lonely, hard place in a relationship with yourself when it's just that human part of you, because we're both and they need to come together. So I think that's our biggest problem of where we end up getting stuck and blocked is we're just in a relationship with the human part versus our being part, which is where our true power lives.
Oh, beautiful. Can you kind of share how your life coaching career has evolved, and what was really a pivotal time that your coaching shifted, and what happened for you that took place?
Yeah. Yeah. So this 180 method has been a part of what I've done for at least the last like 16 years.
Wow.
Um, so when I first started coaching and had learned life coaching from that company I was working with, it was very different from what the 180 is today. It was, very human based. I don't know how else to describe it. And it was
Yeah.
great, but only took people to a certain place. And so there was a shift there of like stepping out of that and being able to develop this 180 method into what it is today. Um, and hopefully it's okay that we talk about this, but
Yeah.
I didn't know God back then. I was very much, I have a degree in metaphysical sciences, so I was all about energy. I was very focused on like new thought movement and a part of that. And the 180 was like being developed during that time, and it was like God was giving it to me, but I just didn't know him or that it was coming from him. And it was powerful, but not like it is today. And that's where the biggest shift took place for me. So 5 years ago, I was doing a lot of the work that I was doing too in that metaphysical place, like took on a very kind of like magical, almost like fifth dimension kind of thing, um, which was not where it needed to be or where I needed to be. And I feel like, God took that moment to be like, enough, you've played over there for a while, you need to come back
Yeah.
because I have work for you, kind of thing. And what happened is I went into a severe, I got really sick and I ended up in the hospital and I had a severe panic attack while I was there. And it's nothing I had ever experienced before. And talk about being humbled and brought to my knees, Erica. Like, I was like, I'm a master life coach. Like, I've
Right.
helped people overcome this and I've helped people heal through this. And how is this happening? Um, but it needed to happen. I feel like I was like pulled out of the darkness and into the light, so to
Yeah.
speak. And from that time on, it was a year-long process of healing my
Wow.
body. I had gone through from that panic attack. I kind of got stuck in that and had anxiety and insomnia. I had to take medication for it. Things I never, ever said. Like, I was so against medication. I was like, anxiety, what is that? Like, I didn't understand it,
Yeah.
didn't know it. And just going through it myself and actually having to like reapply. I had stopped doing my own work.
Yep.
So not only was I like, in the wrong kind of place coaching, I had also stopped doing anything that I was telling and coaching others through. And I really felt like I was exempt. Like I'd already done the work, I'm done, you
Right.
know. Just so I needed to be humbled and brought to that place. So, from that moment forward of meeting him and going through my own healing, and reapplying the 180, it took a shift in being focused and how to get from this human to being part, and having to apply it myself again from this new place has now just taken what was already great and made it what it needed to be, which was
Beautiful.
so much greater than what it was.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's amazing. I feel as well the same when you know that like these certain tools work because it's something that you once went through, and that's why I think a
Mhm.
lot of people teach this work, right? Is
Yeah.
through their own process that they went through. And then we think like, okay, we're able to teach this. We don't need to do our work, if you want to say, or continue our work. And so sometimes we're brought back to like, okay, now I have to go back to my tools that actually has brought me here, right? And so I think, again, I think it's an ongoing journey in life. I don't think any of us, life coach, psychologists, or whatever you are, I think you're not absent of still needing to return to the work on ourselves
Always.
and
Yeah.
taking that ownership. So,
Oh, yeah.
so
So true.
beautiful. There's so much wealth in everything you shared. And I know like there is so much more. And I want people to really, the reason why I really wanted to highlight what you teach is because it is so transformative. And I know we have good friends that speak so highly of it. So this is just a window into what you teach and why this is the process of getting from healing, not just dealing with life circumstances, and actually being able to take ownership for your life and leading it down a path that feels blissful and alive and vibrant, you know? And
Mhm.
so that, I think everybody wants that. Nobody, like, I mean, honestly, just learning how to communicate more efficiently, like, will really eliminate a lot of stress in relationships. And so I want people to learn more about you. So everything will be in the show notes. But I know you're offering, you still work one on one with clients. You also have a group coaching. Can you kind of share what possibly people could work with you, how best to find you?
Yeah. So yeah, I do one-on-one and groups, and there's also some online products too that are available as well. The best place to find me is on Instagram, and then through the link tree that's there, to have some kind of a complimentary connection and session together where we can just explore where you're at and what it is that you're really looking towards and for. I like to keep my practice. I want to keep it very intimate, let's say it that way, because it's very important to me that I work with the people who are ready for this level of transformation, and this healing. So you're not going to get like a bot or, some random person that gets on the phone with you. It will be me.
So remarkable. And that's what I know from speaking to you. You are absolutely so passionate about what you do because you truly care. It is
Yeah.
something that it's part of your heart that you're giving out. And I just think it's so beautiful and it's so inspiring. And I'm inspired by you. So thank you for everything you do and helping people heal and truly coming to a place of just feeling bliss in living
Mm,
this life, this human
yes.
experience and being
Oh,
able to
so
be in the
good.
experience, right?
So
Uh,
good.
so, Alejandra, I'm going to ask you what I always ask all my guests. So, if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you've learned along your journey, and you feel it's something you need to shout out at the rooftop for everybody to hear right now, what would that piece of wisdom be and why?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I think it kind of goes back to what we've talked about today and just that ownership part, and that life doesn't happen to you. You completely have the ability to take ownership of yourself and of what's being created, and that there's just such beauty and vibrancy when you do take that ownership. It's so opposite, a 180, if you will, from what you think it will be when you actually do take ownership. And it creates this just, openness that allows for perseverance to happen versus motivation. Because motivation is fleeting and it can like be, something we're constantly chasing after. But when you have ownership, you can persevere through anything, and it makes it that much more sweeter when you get to the other side, or that end result that you can just like, bask in.
So beautifully said and so inspiring, honestly. Like, who doesn't want to take ownership now after the way she laid that out so perfectly? Alejandra, it's been such an honor. I just adore you and I just thank you again. And I'm just so honored to call you a friend and to also get to know you more on an intimate level, but also just to help share your gifts with others. So,
Thank you.
everybody, go check out everything in the show notes. Go follow Alejandra Crisafulli, the
Yeah.
baller coach. Also
Yes.
known, oh yeah, why the baller coach? I want to
Oh,
know.
that's funny. Yeah. It was a client who called me that, and she was like, "You're such a baller, but not in the way of like traditional baller." So, it's really about redefining what baller is, which I look at baller as that we choose to win the fight against fear, speak through truth instead of falsehood, and really just promote wisdom rather than confusion, and to focus on faith beyond obstacles. That's what a true baller is.
That's freaking amazing. I love that. And I did not know that. So thank you for sharing
Yes.
that. Love you, girl. Appreciate you
Love
so
you
much.
too.